Actually, Rula wrote this book in Italian, and so I volunteered my services as the reader. That's why I'm here. Originally, we planned on the film opening in December, but in looking at the landscape of blandishment, conflict, and confusion, felt like we needed to spend more time preparing the audience and the psyche of our fellow world citizens for the film, and in that way somehow left Rula's book dangling without a movie to support it now. So I find myself reading this book a lot, very happily, and so the movie, what we're going to do is we're actually going to show the film on March 15th at the General Assembly at the United Nations for 2,000 people, and that's when the movie will open. And so will be some other screenings on the way to that. We showed it at the Council of Foreign Relations on Thursday, and then we were going to show it at the 92nd Street Y at the end of February, and wanted to kind of cuddle the world in some sort of way and form some sort of coalition of sanity to kind of find some sort of post-left and right kind of dialogue about this issue. When I read her book, well, I was having a show of paintings at the Palazzo Venezia in Rome, and we met a friend of hers, Walter Veltroni, who was the mayor of Rome, saw her in the afternoon and said, well, this guy came over to my office this morning in his pajamas and he turned off the lights. And she said to him, well, sounds sort of weird. And she said, no, no, he's a painter. He's having a show at the Palazzo Venezia. She said, yes, I was invited to that, but I'm not going to go. She said, no, you should go. You should go there. And so there were about 300 people there, and then we met that evening, and we started talking. And I asked Rula if she was Indian. She said to me, no, I was born in Israel. And I said, are you Jewish? She said, no, I'm Palestinian. And then I guess I hesitated for a moment, and she said, are you scared? And I said, should I be? I probably should have been. But after our meeting, we talked about some things, and she told me that she had written a book. This is one of 3 books that she's written, and there was a script based on it that she sent me to read. And after reading it, I said, "Can I read your book?" So she sent me a rough translation of her book. And after reading that, I sent her a letter that I thought I might read to you. It's very short. Anyway, July 7, 2007. Dear Rula, I've read your book and like to share some thoughts with you. I'm very touched by all the issues related to children, because I think that the main challenge we have to deal with it is not what kind of world we're going to give to our children, but rather what kind of children are we going to give to this world. We can leave them the best world ever, green, peaceful, safe, but if they're not aware of what respect is, humanity, charity, they'll just make it worse again. That's why your story about education is so relevant. Education gives a child self-confidence, self-esteem, and most of all, the ability to choose, and that's the first step to freedom. That's the core message of your story for me. The political background is, of course, present, as we can't talk about this region without being accused of making a political statement. That's okay. People are waiting for statements about these issues because people need certainties. They want explanations. People can go blind looking for explanations. Life doesn't need them all the time. Sometimes you just have to let lives speak for themselves, which I think your book succeeds in doing. There's only one thing that all people on this earth share without any exception. We've all been a child once. And you bring all of us back to that time when the choice doesn't really rely on the child, but on destiny, or whatever we call it. I could have been you, Rula, Hind, Fatima, Nadia, or Miral. A child is always a promise that can be fulfilled or compromised. That's what this film will be about. Embarked on this work together, and I guess you'll see the movie someday. I hope you'll see the movie. And I'd like to read you a little bit from this. There are many stories in this book. When I read the book, I sort of thought it felt like the film Rocco and His Brothers in a way, because there are different vignettes, and then everything kind of becomes tied together. We had a dinner the other night where it was a book party, and I read something from the book, and as we sat through dinner, invariably at different moments in the dinner, I would just sort of jump back up, find another passage, and read it. And it was a little bit unruly, but it was natural, and I had a lot of fun. This first bit I'd like to read is it says, Part 2, Nadia. After helping her younger sister Tamam finish her homework and her mother mend the fishing nets, Nadia remained seated for the remainder of the afternoon on the steps leading down from the little hill in front of her house in the middle of nowhere, an area known as Husseini. From that spot she had a view of the entire city of Haifa and could glimpse the sea amid all the white houses and new buildings that were springing up haphazardly around the harbor. Nadia's father was a fisherman who had drowned a few months before during a storm. At the funeral, Alwan, Nadia's mother, stood beside the coffin and announced to her community that she was expecting a baby. Soon after, Nadia, her pregnant mother, and 8-year-old sister moved into a smaller house. With Nadia's help, her mother continued to repair fishing nets after the baby was born, and Nadia cleaned offices 2 afternoons a week, but their lives became more and more difficult. On weekends, they would gather prickly pears and go to the beach to sell them to passerby and tourists. There were many days when Nadia and her family ate only a single meal consisting of a piece of homemade bread sprinkled with olive oil and za'atar, a mixture of ground oregano and sesame seeds. A sudden noise distracted Nadia from her daydream. She turned around to see a short man with extremely pale skin, an unkempt beard, and an incipient paunch that was pressing against his black leather belt. The man stared at her without moving or saying a word. His eyes were tiny, and Nadia didn't like the look they gave her. She was about to turn around and find the sea again when the man called her by name. Stepping closer, he asked if she recognized him, then embraced her, kissing her on the cheek, with moist lips that made her shiver in disgust. As she later learned, the man's name was Nimir, and he worked in the port. Although he said he'd attended her father's funeral, Nadia couldn't recall ever having seen him before. According to Arab tradition, it was not good for a woman's reputation if she and her daughters lived alone, for the common belief held that a husband guaranteed social protection. Thus, 8 months after the funeral, Nadia's mother got married again, this time to Nimir, the man who had stood in front of Nadia on the hill. He moved in with them in their neighborhood in Husseini. Nimir was a shrewd businessman who dearly loved money and cultivated good relations with the fishermen of the city. He started managing the net mending operation, keeping for himself all the proceeds from the work which Nadia and her mother continued to perform by themselves. One of his strongest convictions was that his wife and stepdaughter were insufficiently productive, and so he had Nadia drop out of school when she was only 12. Work strengthens the mind and the body, he'd like to say, as he watched his stepdaughter bustling about the nets from daybreak till dusk. Nadia's little sister Tamam was only 8, but Nimr decided that the time was right for her to drop out of school as well. She was already rather skilled at knotting nets, and he saw no reason why she shouldn't do more of it. His wife's efforts to dissuade him were in vain. Another pair of hands is always needed, he said, justifying himself by declaring that he had taken on 4 more mouths to feed. He constantly reminded the girls that he had done his part, now it was up to them to demonstrate their gratitude. Nadia wondered what she should be grateful for, since she and her mother and sister were earning money for him, while he did no work, spent his time gambling, and forbade them to buy anything except simple food and a few articles of second-hand clothing. However, observing that her mother made no objection and knowing full well that her stepfather, when he wished to be particularly convincing, would use his belt, Nadia ended up giving in. At those moments, when their backs were burning under the leather strap, the girls would look at their mother and wonder why she did nothing to defend them. She, in turn, lowering her eyes and covering her ears to block out the screams, would run into the adjoining room. A woman of little education who cowered before her husband's authority, she thought that putting a good face on a bad business was better than running the risk of finding herself and her girls alone again. The result was that she sided with her husband in every circumstance, remaining loyal and devoted to him and sacrificing her daughters. Their first year together passed in a sad, recurring cycle of domestic violence, little instances in which Nimr bullied everyone while Nadia's mother became smaller and smaller, less and less present. The girls grew accustomed to the rage their stepfather systematically took out on them and could sense when it was about to arrive, like a wave that swells up before it crashes into the rocks. They recognized it from the expression on his face when he came home, from his narrowed eyes and clenched lips. At such times, the slightest wrong move or single misjudged word would suffice to unleash all his fury. One morning, Nimr entered the bathroom by mistake while Nadia was taking a shower. Surprised, he stood motionless in the doorway and watched her for a length of time she found interminable. In her embarrassment, Nadia tried awkwardly to cover herself with her arms and hands. After a few seconds, her stepfather turned around and went away. That same evening, he entered the girls' bedroom and slipped into bed with Nadia, who had recently turned 13. The bed creaked, and Nadia felt the man's whole weight bearing down on the mattress. A heavy odor enveloped the room, a mixture of tobacco and sweat that penetrated her nostrils. "Hi, Nadia," he whispered, kissing her on the cheek, and she was conscious of the same sensation of clamminess and filth that had disgusted her the first time he kissed her. Then he began to touch her, and Nadia felt his rough hands descending lower and lower. She remained still the entire episode, pervaded by a feeling of nausea and fear of something she didn't understand, breathing only at intervals, trying not to make the slightest noise and not to think about the odor that was robbing her of air. Finally, without a word, her stepfather went away, closing the door behind him. Nadia couldn't fall asleep that night. She felt sick and somehow dirty, without knowing why. She lay stretched out, her legs stiff, her body trembling incessantly until the first rays of the sun lit up the summit of Mount Carmel. She knew that her stepfather would leave soon and waited until she heard the door close. Then slowly she got up. Her muscles ached from the rigid position she had maintained all morning. Nadia filled the tub with steaming hot water and immersed herself in it. Instantly she began to tremble again. She placed her arms around her drawn-up legs and burst into tears. Her mother, passing the bathroom on her way to the kitchen, saw her daughter but asked no questions. Her skin was red and irritated. Then her mother reappeared in the doorway and reminded her to bring the prickly pears to the beach and pick up the nets from the fishermen. While she combed her hair, Nadia looked out the bathroom window at the lower part of the city. The clear morning sky allowed her to see Haifa Bay, shimmering in all possible shades of red and yellow. Some noises rose from the port, the sounds of a ship docking or putting out to sea, but the neighborhood was still relatively silent, despite the fact that the previous night her adolescence had been shattered. At 8 o'clock, she woke up her 2 sisters, then fixed breakfast for Tamam, and gave the baby Ruba some milk. At that moment, she made a decision she'd find some way to get out of that house. Obviously, there's more. This has to do with Fatima, who we'll tell you about her in a minute. Pardon? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. The bus proceeds slowly, immersed in the blinding light of noon. It's filled with kids in various school uniforms and workers wearing stained overalls and worn-out shoes. Fatima's on her feet, holding on to one of the supports. Other people get on the bus at the next stop, and now it's really crowded. There's a noticeable odor, pungent and nauseating. The girl sitting in front of her has fallen asleep. Her mouth is half open, and she's clutching a handbag to her chest. The bus brakes suddenly, making the passengers lurch forward, then back. The girl's bag opens, and a book falls out. Fatima stoops to pick it up. It's a volume of art history. She gazes at one of the illustrations. It shows a beautiful woman, completely nude, standing on a large seashell. Her skin is milky. Her head tilts toward one shoulder, and the winged figure exhales a wind that gently tussles her long blonde hair. On the woman's left, a nymph offers a cloak. Behind her, the ocean's horizon is lost in the blue of the sky. The girl wakes up. Fatima hands her the book and smiles. For an instant, the world seems to be in harmony with the image in the book, even inside the crowded bus on the bumpy streets of Jerusalem, with its white houses piled one on top of another, and the Mount of Olives in the background. Then the cell door opens with the grating metallic sound that awakens her each morning. Fatima eased into consciousness, her head still full of the painting she'd dreamed about. After a moment, she raised her upper body a little to see which guard was on duty, but the door had closed again, and Fatima found herself looking at a tall, slender young woman with full lips, light brown eyes that almost seemed yellow, and long, straight black hair. But there's no room for Venus in this tormented land, Fatima thought. This is where beauty dies. Without much enthusiasm, she said hello to her new cellmate, turning her side and resting her head on her pillow. Nadia, obviously something happened to Nadia before she got to prison, where she met Fatima, and Fatima and Nadia became sisters-in-law, because when Nadia got out of prison, Fatima encouraged her to go and live in Jerusalem with her brother, who was an imam at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And they had a child. Jamal and Nadia had a child. In fact, they had two children. One of them was Miral, who was Rula, and her sister, Rania. In the film, we don't really deal with Rania, and the movie is essentially the story of Miral, so she doesn't have a sister in the film. But the movie is the story of Fatima, Nadia, Hind, and Miral, and Jamal, her father, and I think you get kind of a taste of what we're talking about here. Anything you want to say? I think I'm done for a while.
Hello. Yeah, I wrote this book in 2003. It came out actually in Italy first because I used to live there and work there. And it's like about these four women that were in their destiny and their lives are intertwined. And it's a true story. Everything that happens that you read in this book happens in real life. To me, to people that I knew and I met, or to people around me that I witnessed their lives. When Hind Husseini was a very wealthy woman, very aristocratic family, Husseini family that used to be half of Jerusalem was owned by Husseini, the other half by the Dijani family. So, and that was in 1948. So this woman was very well educated, and she was only girl in her family. She has 5 brothers, and everybody thought that she will, she will become the wife of another Dijani family because that's the way it used to be. And they covered all the main positions in Jerusalem, the governor of Jerusalem or the mufti of Jerusalem. And one day, 1948, she's walking in the streets at 6 o'clock in the morning. She used to be a teacher. She was going to her work, and she meets her destiny. She meets 55 kids near the Damascus gate, sitting in the streets, and she's shocked. She doesn't understand. Jerusalem used to be, until the night before, a peaceful place where children plays in the grounds, but she saw these kids crying, and they seemed scared, and they seemed, some of them without clothes, or the clothes very dirty, and she go to them and she asked them, who are they? And the biggest one was 12-year-old, her name is Zainab, and the smallest one, his name is Mahmoud, and he was 2 years old. And they told her that they were the survivor of a massacre that happened the night before, the massacre of Deir Yassin. And she understands that war is already arrived to Jerusalem, that they are already in a state of war. And so she decided to take these children home. And from that day, her house became the House of Children, Darik Tifel. It still exists till today. Immediately she had from 500 in the next 3 months, from 55 children to 900 children. So she moved everybody to the bigger place where her grandfather used to live, where she was born. And I arrived to that school when I was 5 years old, after my mother Nadia, who he read about, who Julian read about, killed herself, committed suicide. So the first night in that school, I remember trying to sleep, but my sister kept on crying, and it was dark, and I put my hand on her face, and I felt her tears, and she said, I want to go home. And I told her, we'll find a way, I'll take you home. I tried to run away from the school. They caught us, of course. We were too little to escape. They brought us back, and I decided that I became the mother of my sister from that day. And I had to figure out a way to make her sleep and to calm her, because there was no way. She was so desperate. She was allergic to the place, because suddenly she was brought from a house where she had a mother and a father, and she was the smallest kid, surrounded with attention, to a big room with 8 kids, and she had to take care of herself, and she didn't have the figure, the people that she used to see. So it's shocking for a child. So I decided to tell her stories, and I started telling her stories every night. And that's the only way that could calm her or put her to sleep. I think I became a writer then. And when I was 15, I was watching television, and I saw an interview with Naguib Mahfouz, who was my ideal as a writer, and he won a Nobel Prize for literature. And he said that in the interview that he wrote his first novel when he was 6 years old. I thought it was too late for me. But then I left my country for various reasons, because I got a scholarship, but you will read through the story of Miral, what happened, because I lived that moment of the first Intifada, and it was very violent. And Hind Husseini, who was my teacher and my mentor, believed so much in education. Anyway, she used to give me books, so because when I ran out of stories to tell the kids or the children, or even my sister, she would give me books and I start reading, and I became somebody that when everybody in the school used to take care of other children, dress them up or feed them, whatever, I was the one that tells stories. So whenever they wanted to keep a class quiet, they would call me and I would go there and would tell stories. When I used to go home in the weekend and see my father, Jamal, and when I feel that he was sad sometimes, or he would ask me about the school, whatever, and I would tell him about the books I read. So when I was 14, almost 15, the Intifada broke out, the first Intifada, and the school were closed. So Husseini thought, okay, I'll send you to the refugee camps to open the schools and teach the children, because she really believed that education is the only way that can guarantee that any generation can build a nation and can build a country. And there's no way that you can have sustainable diplomacy or peace without regular people has access to education, especially girls. She really believed in that, because for her, if girls has freedom of choice, that means a different future. Because otherwise, you can marry off at the age of 13. If you have, of course, a very poor family, or you have no family, you can become prostitute. Or the worst option, you can become manipulated and used by religious fanatics. And she thought that that was the worst option. And to me, that's absolutely the worst. So we used to go to the refugee camp, teach children how to read and write and do other things. Then I witnessed many violence during the first Intifada. I went to Italy, and in 2000 exactly, I was in my TV station, and I was watching television, and I saw the second Intifada happen, and I thought, oh my God, we lived already that. We went through that, and there was a peace agreement, and we are back to the same moment. So I start really writing down my memories, and but I didn't want to make it as a memoir. I thought I was too young to put out a memoir. I wrote it as a novel. It gave me that emotional distance, so I can write about my mother in a very objective way and be honest about her. Because yes, she was raped, but she has a lot of self-hate, self-destruction. She became a belly dancer, ran away from home. She was promiscuous. She was, she used to drink a lot. So, but I also wrote about the love and hope that my father, my teacher, and I had for my country in a way, and for the girls and what I mean by girls, not only the girls in my school, many people that I met as civil society. I'd like to thank Julian for reading. Of course, my English is not my first language. My first language is Arabic, and became Italian. So for me, it's hard to read in English as beautifully as he does. And I'm open to questions.
I think there was also, I think when Hind sent those girls out to reopen the schools at the refugee camps, maybe she knew this was going to happen, maybe she didn't, but obviously she had created an oasis for these girls, somehow drawing a line around them and saying this was a safe place, this was a school. And when the first Intifada started and these girls went out to the refugee camp, she saw a demolition of a house, and so looked around and did what any normal, healthy, conscious participant in any community would do, try to help them in some way. And obviously there's a battle that's going on between a father who's trying to protect his daughter, so he doesn't want her to get into a political situation, a teacher who's trying to save her student. There's a lot of different versions of what somebody can do living in a landscape of conflict. And the other thing is that when we went to East Jerusalem to shoot this movie, we needed the help of not only the Israeli, the Jewish community, but we also needed the help of the Palestinian community. And I was able to shoot in the Al-Aqsa Mosque and was able to shoot in refugee camps. And I asked the Israeli crew if they would speak English when we went into the Husseini house in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, because it was 3 days after the incursion in Gaza occurred, and I didn't want to feel like we were an occupying army in these people's house, because these people let us come into their house, and we actually shot the film in Hind Husseini's house. We shot the film in the house where her mother was raped. And then Rula at one moment also had to talk to the community, because they're not proud of the fact that the girl was raped by her stepfather. Two, that her mother actually wasn't, that her father actually wasn't her father. He wasn't Rula's father, and he wasn't Rania's father. But this man, sort of like a saint, raised these two girls as if they were his, and instilled in them a kind of forgiveness and understanding and love that is something that really spoke to me in this book and informed my, I felt like actually I watched her grow up. But what I'm saying is to go back, to take this information and to try to make a film out of it. Certain people might look at the movie and then think, oh, we're watching a demolition of a house. Somebody that's coming from another perspective might think, God, they're showing a Palestinian child being raped by her stepfather. So I don't think that the movie set out to please anybody. And but there's an honesty in her book,
well, I couldn't do it without being honest. I decided when I became an anchor woman in Italian television, I saw the way media manipulates certain facts, and I thought it was shocking to me that certain news that comes there has to be reduced or other things. I mean, when I was covering the Iraqi war, which I took an award for, simply because I was telling what I saw. I was telling what was happening. I was the first one denouncing certain things, and I was attacked for that. Hardly attacked. I mean, everybody that was against that war, if you remember here in 2003, 2002, or 2004, we were harassed. 2006, everybody became suddenly against that invasion. But then I decided to apply the same method everywhere, because otherwise, you know what? You become part of propaganda system, and I really thought that you can be to be honest with yourself and with your own community is the only way you can evolve, and this community can evolve. We cannot watch the others and accuse the others of doing terrible things if we don't see what we are doing to ourselves and within ourselves. And so I wrote about my mother, and I called my family. I told them openly, my sisters, and my aunt, who was still alive, that I would be doing that. And of course, you know, as an Arab conservative family, they were not happy about it. Or even my neighbors who knew my father and loved him and honored him thought that I was putting my father down. They didn't understand that I was actually putting him up, because for me, in their eyes, he was a hero. Somebody that takes care of women that was so destroyed and so... and for me, what they saw as weakness, his weakness, to me was his strength. And the fact that he was humble and he was so loving, even to us who were, I mean, I understood that he was not my father a week before he died, simply because he was very sick, and we made an exam so we can give him blood, and the doctor looked at both of us and said, well, none of you is his daughter. And you know, we find these brutal news in a very, but then I understood who was my father, and I met my real father, but till today he's my father. He's the one that, and that kind of love, what really brought me to write this book. But you know, his family, so when we look at a family and what does it mean to have a home or background or family, you know, his sister actually was the first woman that carried a terrorist attack in Palestine. Her name is Fatima. She really put a bomb in 1967 in a movie theater, the Zionist movie theater. And she was a nurse. And that contradiction, you know, you're supposed to be a doctor or nurse and save lives. You know, the kind of horror that she saw during the war just switched her. And she became very, very extreme and very violent. She was in jail, and in jail she met this destroyed woman who was Nadia, and she tried to save her. And there's one moment in the book where Nadia tells Fatima that she was never happy in her life, never, except for these moments in the cell with Fatima. That she never loved anybody. She never felt the love of her mother. She never felt home, except in that moment and in that place. But Fatima felt that we were all prisoners in that country, all prisoners. And she loved Samih al-Qasim. He's a poet. And I took passages of some of his poems, and this is the only thing that I will read tonight. From the window of my small cell, I can see trees smiling at me, roofs filled with my own people, windows weeping and praying for me. From the window of my small cell, I can see your large cell. She thought that everybody was in a cell, that the whole country was in prison of fear, prison of paranoia, prison of violence. And I wanted to write this book to free myself of that prison. And I think Julian made a great movie that will give this country an opportunity to free themselves from the prison of ideology, or from seeing the rest of the world through as one side. Because you know, when you talk about Palestine or Israel, everybody is like, oh, I am pro-Palestinian or I am pro-Israeli. You will find more pro-Israeli in this country, of course. And I think the way he showed the whole conflict, my story, and the way that he honored the story of my family, it's actually a way to open all of us our eyes and see how this tragedy is eating everybody and consuming everything there. And I really wish that everybody that will read this book or will see the movie will see the humanity of it, and not to see the politics. Because yes, the politics will exist forever, but to see the stories of how civil society live under that conflict, this is something that you don't have in the news. And this movie is about something. I mean, we see so many movies about nothing, with all respect. But this movie is about real something. I think the last time I saw a movie about something when I saw Gandhi.